Okay. What is Angel Share?
Angel Share, which is the latest from Ken Loach and Paul Laverty, who's, of course, the writer of Even the Rain, which I really, really like very much. And if you get a chance to see Even the Rain, I know it's quite hard to track it down in some cinemas. Winner of the Jury Prize at Cannes, finds Ken Loach in surprisingly and, frankly, rewardingly upbeat form. It starts in typical Ken Loach fashion. It's a sort of social realist. You see a series of people in court up for a number of offences, and the offences being read out. One of them is Robbie, is this newcomer Paul Brannigan, who is appears to be guilty of grievous bodily harm, and he looks like he may well go to prison, but then his defence lawyer argues that he is about to become a father, so he ends up getting community payback, about which the victims of his attack are not very pleased at all. So the payback is that he has to go and do community service. Whilst he's on community service, he's taken under the wing of the supervisor played by John Henshaw, who, as part of the sort of rehabilitation process, decides to take him and some fellow paybackers to a whiskey tasting, to a distillery, to see how whiskey is made, where it turns out that our anti-hero has a surprisingly good nose. Here's a clip.
What I want you to do is have a little nose of the whiskey. That's basically a wee smell. And tell me what you think it reminds you of.
My dad's breath when I was wee. That's what it reminds me of.
It reminds me of an old pub down at used to be at the bottom of my street.
Cool. Anything else?
It's a Christmas cake I had once at my nana's house.
Well done. It's really good. That's a Christmas cake that you're smelling, is the fruity flavours. Very impressed.
So it turns out that he has this talent. He has, an extraordinarily good nose, and he can smell a really rare whiskey when presented with one. But he obviously has a sort of, this ragamuffin criminal past. And very soon the plot contrives to put him in a position whereby his newfound knowledge of whiskey offers him not only a job opportunity, but also the opportunity to grab. The Angel's Share is referred to the amount when whiskey evaporates and a certain amount goes missing. And there is a sort of crime caper thing going on. Now, the interesting thing about the film is this. It takes a director like Ken Loach to be able to make, a good-hearted, upbeat, slightly fantastical, crime caper movie, but which has its feet really solidly in social realist issues. Very few people do meetings as well as Ken Loach, and this sounds like a kind of a strange thing to praise him for, but there's a sequence when they're first doing the tasting, that sequence that you heard then when they're being shown around the distillery. They really look like meetings. They really look like a bunch of people in room, the way that people genuinely talk. There's a fantastic scene in Land and Freedom in which people sit around and argue about anarcho-syndicalism, that everybody says, how can you possibly do that in a drama? Stop the drama and just have everyone sitting around having a political argument. But nobody does that like Ken Loach, because Ken Loach has a brilliant way of directing people that seems like they are genuinely real people. What that means is that when the drama itself goes off in sort of flights of frankly slightly unbelievable fantasy, it doesn't matter, because you're so grounded in the characters, you're so grounded in their world, you believe in them so much that you kind of allow the movie the right to have a slightly fantastical caper film. And obviously in the back of all this there's Whiskey Galore, which incidentally, if you love Local Hero, as I do, and I think you do too, Whiskey Galore is clearly in the background all the way through Local Hero as well. So I thought it did that really lovely thing, which was that there's one sequence in which the central character has to go to one of those reconciliation meetings in which he has to hear from the family of somebody who he has beaten up, and it's really, really difficult and brutal and tough. It's a really tough thing to watch, as it should be. But the genius of Ken Loach is that he then manages to take that and there's a quote on the poster which refers to this as being the Scottish Full Monty, which seems like a strange thing, but I understand what they mean. But this has an altogether more rugged, feet on the ground sense, more than Full Monty did. And I like Full Monty very much. Partly it's because the performances are just terrific. Loach really knows how to direct people. Partly it's because it's that recurrent Ken Loach theme that within people who are marginalised by society, there are talents that if you just gave them the opportunity to explore them, something great would happen. Because that goes right the way back to Kes, which famously, I remember seeing Kes I suppose it must have been the early 1970s, being dropped off by my mum outside the Odeon, the Ionic in Golders Green. And then, of course, Kes has got such a dark, bleak finale. It's this moment of opportunity and joy, and then it's a really tragic ending. Well, here we're much closer to sort of looking for Eric territory. You know, the kind of the fantasy of, you know, dreaming about
Just
Eric
last time he came on, I think, with famously Eric Cantona in the studio.
That's right. Eric Cantona came on himself. Yeah, absolutely. And so what I like about it is it's big-hearted, but it still has absolutely feet-on-the-ground social realism. It has the kind of terrific performances that we've come to expect from Ken Loach, so much so that you almost don't feel like mentioning it, because you just think, oh, well, it's Ken Loach. Of course it's got great performances, and that's something that you have to remember. You know, not everyone can get those kind of performances out of people, but it's a very, very, very well-chosen cast. I mean, it's often been said that Ken Loach is as much a social worker as a filmmaker. Well, that's true, but here he's an entertainer as well. And the key thing is that they use that Proclaimers song, 500 Miles, you know? Mm-hmm. And that's the tone of the film. That's the tone of a lot of the film, is that it's you know, celebration. I love 500 Miles anyway, and in a lot of films, if you use 500 Miles, you just think, oh, you really haven't earned that, and don't do that. It's just cheesy, and it's not going to work.
Is it Shrek it came up in first?
Yes, I'm sorry, they
really?
do
Where did
use
this
it.
come
That's
from?
right, yeah. My favourite Proclaimer song is Sunshine on Leith, which I think is just heartbreakingly wonderful. But this is a movie which can get away with using that because it is completely in tone with the keeping of the film. Great performances, real good, solid, socialist, realist reality, made by somebody who you just want to embrace. I mean, you want to embrace those filmmakers because they seem to see the good in everyone whilst understanding all the difficulties and the darkness of the world. I really enjoyed it. I not only smiled and laughed, but I felt uplifted and moved, and I had a really good time in the cinema with it.